Azalea stared at the promotion email on her screen, her pulse quickening as Jackson's name flashed at the top. Her hard work, the long nights, the sacrifices, all of it had led to this moment. But once again, it was someone else who got the promotion. Someone who didn't have to fight through the constant dismissal and doubt she faced. Someone who didn't look like her. She had been overlooked before, but this time it felt different. She had poured everything into her role, always, exceeding expectations. Yet the system had a way of making sure she remained invisible. Jackson, who had only recently joined the team, had earned it. But had he worked as hard? Did he know the price of consistently having to prove yourself? Azalea closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The weight of all the years of frustration came crashing down. This was it. She wasn't going to keep waiting for others to recognize her worth. It was time to make a change. She picked up her phone and dialed Mavis. "I'm done pretending," she said, her voice steady. "It's time for me to step up." Azalea paced around her apartment, the phone still pressed against her ear. Mavis was quiet on the other end, but Azalea could hear the concern in her silence. She knew her best friend well enough to know that Mavis wasn't sure whether to support her anger or worry about the potential fallout. "Azalea, are you sure about this? You're talking about shaking everything up," Mavis finally said, breaking the quiet. "You know how this company works. If you make waves, it'll cost you." "I've been playing by their rules for so long," Azalea replied, her voice firm, but a tinge of exhaustion seeping through. "And it's never been enough. If I keep waiting for permission to be seen, I'll keep waiting forever." Mavis sighed. "I get it, but you've worked so hard to get here. If you do this, you'll lose a lot. Are you ready for that?" Azalea stood by the window, looking out over the city. She had always dreamed of a moment where she could be seen, respected for the work she had done. Now she had to make a choice. "I'm ready," she said quietly. "It's time for me to take control." Azalea sat at her desk the next morning, staring at the quiet hum of her computer. The room was almost eerily still, the sound of the office building's air conditioning her only company. She knew that today couldn't be like any other day. It was the beginning of her change, and every move she made now would echo in the decisions she made tomorrow. She took a deep breath and opened her laptop, her fingers moving swiftly over the keys as she began drafting her email. It had to be perfect, calm, calculated, professional. No anger. She didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. The subject line read, Leadership Role. In the body, she laid out everything she had accomplished, each project she had led, the milestones the company had reached because of her input. She highlighted the ways in which her dedication had positively impacted the team, her undeniable work ethic, and most importantly, her vision for the future of the company. Her finger hovered over the send button. There was no going back once it was sent. But this was a step she had to take. With one final breath, Azalea clicked send. Azalea's heart raced as she sat back in her chair, staring at the blinking cursor on her screen. The email was sent, but now came the waiting. She had laid herself bare, sent her plea for acknowledgement into the void. All she could do now was wait for the response, or the silence that often followed such bold moves. Hours passed. Her phone remained still, untouched. The office buzzed around her, but the quiet isolation of her desk felt suffocating. Her colleagues were busy with their tasks, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Then the email. Alert pinged. Her stomach dropped. It was from the HR director. She clicked it open, her eyes scanning the words quickly. Azalea, we appreciate your feedback and the points you've raised. However, after careful consideration, the promotion has been awarded to Jackson. We trust you will continue to contribute positively in your current role. The response was brief, dismissive even, as if her plea had been nothing more than a formality. Her vision, her years of dedication all brushed aside. Azalea's jaw tightened. It wasn't just the rejection. It was the message that she would never be enough. Azalea stared at the email for what felt like an eternity, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quite capture. She had expected disappointment, but the finality in those words hit harder than she had anticipated. We trust you will continue to contribute positively in your current role. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the laptop, but the weight of the words lingered. She wasn't angry anymore. She was just tired. Tired of fighting for recognition. Tired of trying to prove her worth in a system that had never really wanted her to succeed. Her phone buzzed on the desk, Mavis's name flashing across the screen. Azalea picked it up, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "Mavis, they chose him. Again," she said, her tone flat. Mavis didn't speak for a moment. "I knew it was coming. I'm sorry, Az, but you can't keep fighting this battle on their terms. You're worth more than that." Azalea exhaled slowly, letting Mavis's words sink in. For years, she had fought within the system, believing that if she worked hard enough, she'd be rewarded. But that reward would never come. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for permission to take what she deserved. The weight of the rejection still hung heavy, but Azalea knew something had shifted within her. She couldn't keep pushing against a wall that wasn't going to move. It wasn't just about the promotion anymore. It was about reclaiming her power, redefining what success looked like on her own terms. Azalea spent the next few days reflecting, meeting with her mentors, confiding in Mavis, even revisiting her old journal entries. Slowly, she began to piece together a new strategy. She didn't need to beg for recognition. She didn't need the validation of a title or position. She was the one who had built this company into what it was, and she could do it again without asking for permission. She started drafting a plan, a vision for how she could reshape the company's future, one that prioritized inclusivity, respect, and equity. No more fighting for a seat at the table. She would build her own table, with room for others who had been overlooked. When she finished the document, she felt a sense of relief. This was the first step in a much bigger journey. The kind of journey that would shake the very foundation of everything they thought they knew about success. Azalea sat in her office, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The document she had drafted over the past few days was now complete. It wasn't just a business plan. It was a blueprint for change. A plan to transform not just the company, but the entire industry she had fought to belong to. She wasn't just going to keep playing by their rules. She was going to rewrite them. She picked up the phone and dialed Mavis. "I'm doing it," she said when her friend answered. "I'm going to announce my ownership. I've had enough of hiding in the shadows." Mavis's voice cracked with emotion. "Azalea, are you sure? This could get messy. People will be furious." "I'm sure. I've worked for this company. For years. I've built it from the ground up. I'm not asking for their approval anymore." Azalea hung up the phone and took a deep breath. She knew the risks, but the thought of remaining silent was far worse. She opened her laptop again, the cursor blinking on a new email to the board of directors. This time, it wasn't an apology or a plea for recognition. It was a declaration of her ownership, of her power. As she clicked send, a wave of anticipation washed over her. Azalea's heart raced as she watched the email go through. There was no turning back now. Within minutes, her inbox began to flood with responses from the board members, each one more irate than the last. The shock was palpable, but what stung the most was the tone of disbelief in their messages. "Why didn't you inform us sooner? This could jeopardize the stability of the company. Your timing is concerning." The words felt like daggers, each one more dismissive than the last. They weren't concerned about the changes she wanted to bring. They were upset that she had dared to challenge their authority. Azalea closed her laptop, exhaling slowly, but the anger bubbled up quickly. For years, she had been part of this system. Now, they saw her as a threat. Mavis's call came through just as Azalea was about to stand up. "I saw the email," Mavis said softly. "Azalea, are you okay?" I'm fine, Azalea snapped, though she could feel the tightness in her chest. They're angry. They never thought I could own it. But I'm not going anywhere. There was a pause on the other end. You've just started a revolution, you know that, right? Azalea smiled faintly. Let them be angry. It's time for a new way of doing things. The days following Azalea's announcement were a blur. Tension filled the air at the office. Whispers echoed in the hallways, and the undercurrent of disbelief was palpable. Some of her colleagues avoided her gaze, while others tried to mask their discomfort with forced smiles. The division was clear. Azalea's leadership was now under scrutiny. The board's passive-aggressive tactics escalated. Emails questioning her decisions, sudden requests for meetings, and veiled threats about her future at the company. It was as though the very foundation of her authority was being eroded with every interaction. But Azalea didn't back down. She spent hours each day with her team, ensuring they understood her vision and her commitment to them. She pushed forward with new initiatives, making decisions that were bold and, at times, risky. The company's culture needed to change, and she couldn't afford to wait for approval. Mavis checked in regularly, offering emotional support, but Azalea kept most of her feelings to herself. She didn't have the luxury of showing weakness. The battle had begun, not with fists or words, but in every decision she made and every move she took. It wasn't long before Azalea's bold move gained traction outside the company. The news outlets caught wind of her announcement, and soon headlines began to spread, framing her story as one of defiance and empowerment. Black woman takes control of her destiny against all odds, one headline read. The public reaction was mixed. There were those who applauded her courage, calling her a trailblazer. Others, however, deemed her actions as divisive and unsettling, questioning whether her takeover would destabilize the company. Social media exploded with debates, some supporting her, others condemning her for challenging the status quo. Despite the noise, Azalea remained focused. She had expected the backlash, but it didn't make it any easier. The support from the public gave her strength, but the criticism gnawed at her. In the quiet moments, when no one was watching, she questioned herself. Was this truly the right decision? Was she doing enough to prove that her leadership could truly make a difference? But then, she remembered why she had done this. She wasn't fighting for approval. She was fighting for a future where people like her could lead, without compromise. Azalea walked into the conference room, the weight of every eye on her. The board members were gathered, their faces a mixture of frustration and skepticism. They'd called this meeting under the guise of a strategic discussion, but Azalea knew what it was, a last-ditch effort to wrest control back from her. The moment she sat down, Jackson's voice cut through the tension. Azalea, we need to talk about your position. This sudden shift in direction, it's been disruptive. The board's not happy. You need to reconsider your stance. Azalea leaned back in her chair, her gaze steady. I've built this company. I didn't shift anything. I'm just doing what I've always done, leading. You're risking everything, another board member, Elena, added. This could hurt the company's reputation. Azalea's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. She knew where their loyalties lay, aligned with the system, the comfort of the old ways. No, she said calmly, her voice unwavering. What's hurting this company is the refusal to evolve. You've had your chance to lead. Now it's mine. Silence followed, but Azalea knew it wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the office only grew. The board's resistance had reached new heights, but Azalea's determination remained unshaken. However, something unexpected happened. A few employees, long silent in the background, began to approach her with support. One afternoon, Layla, an employee from HR who had always kept to herself, knocked on Azalea's office door. Do you have a minute? She asked quietly. Azalea nodded, gesturing for her to sit. Layla hesitated, then spoke. I don't know if you've noticed, but not everyone here is against you. Some of us, we've been watching and waiting for someone like you. someone who isn't afraid to shake things up. Azalea was taken aback. "You're with me?" Layla's eyes softened. "I'm with the truth, and the truth is you're right. This place needs change. We need to be better." The conversation marked the beginning of new alliances. Employees, who had once stayed quiet, began to openly support Azalea, rallying behind her vision for a company that truly reflected equality and opportunity. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something much bigger. And in that moment, Azalea knew she wasn't fighting alone. The pressure continued to build, but Azalea was no longer fazed by the noise. With Layla and others by her side, she felt a renewed sense of strength, but the stakes had only escalated. The board, frustrated with her growing support, made their next move. They called a company-wide meeting. It wasn't just to discuss business, it was an ultimatum. Azalea stood in front of the entire company, her posture firm, her expression calm. The room buzzed with anticipation as the board chairman, Mr. Carver, began speaking. "We've come to a critical point. As you know, Azalea has taken certain actions that challenge our leadership structure. We believe it's time for a decision to be made. Either she steps down and agrees to return to her previous role, or we'll be forced to take legal action to protect the company's future." Azalea felt the weight of his words, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she looked out, across the room, meeting the eyes of every employee who had supported her in silence. They were her strength now. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice steady but loud enough to be heard. "This company was built on the backs of people like me. I will not step down. Not now. Not ever." The room fell silent. The challenge was out in the open. The battle was no longer just behind closed doors. It was in full view for everyone to see. The fallout from the public challenge was immediate. The tension at the company reached an all-time high, and Azalea knew things could go either way. The board's reaction to her defiance was swift. Behind closed doors, they discussed their next move, and it was clear they were not backing down. Legal threats were on the table, and the corporate world's harsh realities were closing in on her. But for Azalea, there was no turning back. The support from her colleagues was growing, and that was all the fuel she needed. Layla, Mavis, and a few others continued to meet with her in secret, strategizing their next steps. It wasn't just about survival, it was about proving something bigger, that the system of inequality and disregard for true leadership could be broken. One night, as Azalea sat alone in her office reviewing documents and proposals, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jackson, one of the board members she had once trusted. "I can't do this anymore," the message read. "I've seen enough. If you're still standing, I'll stand with you." The words hit her like a wave. Jackson, the one person she never expected to turn, had made his choice. Azalea didn't respond immediately, but her heart swelled with hope. This was the turning point. Her vision was beginning to take shape, and with it, a new era for the company and her own future. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, legal consultations, and late-night strategy meetings. Azalea had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The board was pushing harder, pulling every lever they could to discredit her. But she held her ground, knowing the fight was not just for herself. It was for every person who had been overlooked, pushed aside, or told they weren't enough. Her phone rang at 2 a.m. It was Jackson again. "They're pushing for an emergency meeting," he said, his voice strained. "They want to vote you out." Azalea's mind raced. This was it, the moment everything could collapse. Her heart sank, but she refused to let it show. "Tell them no, I'm not stepping down." "I've tried," Jackson replied, his voice soft with regret. "But the board's not backing off. They're not just fighting you anymore. They're fighting what you represent." She paused, taking in the weight of his words. "I know what I represent," Azalea said firmly. "And I'm not afraid. I won't back down. I'll take it all, but I won't quit." The line went silent for a moment before Jackson spoke again. "Then we fight together." together. Azalea's heart felt heavier, but she knew this was the fight of her life. If she wanted to make history, she had to survive this moment, and it was about to get much harder. The emergency board meeting was set for the following week. The company's future, Azalea's future, hung in the balance. In the days leading up to it, the stakes grew higher. The pressure from the media intensified, the public divided. Some saw Azalea's fight as a courageous stand against corporate corruption, while others labeled her as a troublemaker, someone determined to shake up the establishment for selfish reasons. The board's legal team prepared a case to oust her, and Azalea knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. But she also saw the tide slowly shifting. Jackson wasn't the only one who had grown disillusioned. More board members, once staunchly against her, began to speak out, questioning the ethical implications of their actions. Even employees who had stayed neutral were starting to voice their support. On the morning of the meeting, Azalea arrived early, her mind sharpened by determination. She had one chance to present her vision clearly, and she wasn't going to waste it. When the board convened, Azalea stood before them with the poise of someone who had already won, regardless of the outcome. She wasn't just fighting for her position anymore. She was fighting for every underrepresented voice that had been silenced in the corporate world. This company, she began, her voice strong, was built on the backs of people like me. If you can't see that, then maybe it's time for new leadership. The room went still. Every eye was on her. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Azalea knew that this was her moment to change everything. The room was suffocating with tension as the board members exchanged glances. Weighing the gravity of Azalea's words, the legal team was ready with their arguments, but Azalea's unwavering resolve had created an air of doubt in the minds of even her harshest critics. She could see it in their eyes, uncertainty, discomfort with the power they were losing. Mr. Carver, the board chairman, cleared his throat. This meeting is to decide whether Azalea stays in her position as CEO. We've heard her arguments, but we must consider the consequences of her actions. Azalea's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her posture straight, her face calm. She wasn't afraid anymore. This wasn't just about business, it was about everything she had fought for. She had risked everything, and now it was time for them to decide whether they would accept her as the leader she was destined to be. As the board deliberated, Azalea's mind flashed back to the moment she had first walked into this room, full of dreams, eager to prove herself. Back then, she had been unsure, tentative in her abilities. But now, there was nothing but certainty in her heart. She had earned her place. Minutes dragged on. Then finally, Carver spoke again, his voice quieter, this time. The board has reached a decision. Azalea, you will remain as CEO. The room erupted in murmurs. Azalea stood frozen, the weight of the moment sinking in. She had won. But the battle had only just begun. The victory was sweet, but it was also the beginning of an even harder road. Azalea's position as CEO was secured, but the damage that had been done to the company's culture and public image would take time to repair. The board members who had fought against her were still there, and they weren't about to make her job easy. Some openly avoided her, others tried to undermine her decisions in subtle ways. But Azalea was undeterred. She had come too far to let anything stand in her way. Her first move was to overhaul the company's diversity initiatives, ensuring that positions of power weren't just handed to the same old faces. She called in Layla, Mavis, and a few trusted allies to help develop a strategy that would provide real opportunities for underrepresented talent. This company needs to reflect the world we live in, Azalea said in one of their strategy meetings. We can't keep operating under the illusion that diversity is just a box to check. It has to be real, or nothing changes. The days were long, and the work was exhausting. Azalea spent hours drafting policies, meeting with teams, and negotiating with clients. But with every decision, every initiative, she felt more certain that this was the right path. She was not just building a company, she was building a legacy. Slowly, some of the resistance started to soften. The employees who had been wary now saw the changes taking root, and for the first time in a long time, there was a sense of hope in the air. Azalea knew it wouldn't be easy. She had no illusions about how much work lay ahead, but she was ready to face it, head on. As the weeks passed, the changes within the company began to take shape. Azalea's policies were starting to show tangible results. More underrepresented employees were being promoted, and the company's diversity initiatives gained national attention. But the ripple effect of her actions extended far beyond the boardroom. Her story became a beacon for others in the corporate world. Employees from other companies began to reach out, asking for advice, for guidance on how to challenge the systemic inequalities they faced. Azalea became a symbol of hope, not just for Black women in the corporate world, but for anyone who had been overlooked or underestimated. But with this new status came new challenges. The media began to scrutinize her every move. Was she just a product of a well-timed PR strategy? Was she really the leader she portrayed herself to be? Or was she simply lucky? The questions were endless, and those she had learned to ignore. The noise, they were starting to wear her down. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Azalea sat alone in her office, staring out the window. Her reflection in the glass was the only company she had. She had come so far, but the weight of it all felt heavier than ever. She had won the fight for her position, but had she really won the war? Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Layla. "You're changing everything, and you're not alone. We've got your back." Azalea smiled softly, feeling the warmth of their support. It wasn't over, but she was no longer fighting alone. Months had passed, and Azalea's transformation from a reluctant leader to a bold, unapologetic force was undeniable. The company had thrived under her leadership, not just financially, but culturally. The ripple effect of her actions had grown into a movement, one that extended far beyond the walls of the corporation she had once fought to lead. She had sparked a wave of change, not just within her industry, but across countless others. On a quiet morning, Azalea found herself reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. She stood in the conference room watching as the new team members, diverse, eager, and talented, walked in, ready to take on the world. Their faces were different from those she had seen when she first started, and that gave her hope. She had built this. She had created the space they now occupied, a space where everyone had the chance to thrive, regardless of their race, gender, or background. But it wasn't just about the company's success. It was about the lasting impact she would leave on future generations. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. There would always be challenges, always more to do. But Azalea felt a sense of peace, knowing that she had been part of something greater than herself. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Jackson. "We did it. Together." She smiled, feeling the weight of their shared journey. The battles, the heartbreak, the triumphs, they had all led to this moment. Azalea had not just overcome the odds. She had set the stage for others to follow.